I want to look at a couple of more issues about how we got where we are right now. And one of them is raised directly by you, Paul Krugman. You, in the New York Times this week, were quite critical of Fed Chair Ben Bernanke, saying that he hasn't acted on the convictions he expressed as an academic when he talked about the Japan economic crisis. He proposed much more aggressive steps to take on their slowdown. He responded this week and said that the kind of solutions you at least raise would be reckless. For example, not worrying as much about the limit on inflation.
This is part of why I wrote a book, because we've defined recklessness the wrong way. We think that anything that rocks the boat and is not certain in its outcome would be reckless. But actually allowing unemployment to stay near 9%, allowing the number of long-term unemployed to be 4 million, which hasn't been since the 1930s, which is destroying skills, destroying the attachment of workers to the workforce. A depressed economy has really devastating effects, not just on the short term, but on the long term. You should be willing to take some risks, which I think are very mild ones. Yeah, compare, people talk, what if we had 4% inflation? We had 4% inflation during Reagan's second term. I don't remember that as a time of great dislocation. It was actually a time when a lot of people were feeling good about the economic progress. And it's an amazing thing. I think what's happened to Bernanke, as I say, he's been assimilated by the Borg. He's become more concerned, probably unconsciously, with defending the Fed's institutional safety, because it's the apostle of price stability, than with doing whatever he can to get this economy moving, which, if he listened to Professor Bernanke himself 10 years ago, he would know that he was supposed to be doing more.
Listen to Paul, because he's a leading indicator of something we're going to hear more of, which is the inflation lobby. When a nation gets sufficiently into debt, it does get a school that advocates inflation as a slow-motion repudiation of its debts. It does lighten the burden of it. And Paul is among those who thinks, and here I certainly would disagree, that government is so skillful that it can let the genie just a little bit out of the bottle. It will have 2 or 3, or you said at most 4%, and it will stop there. Good luck with that.
A little bit of history. After World War II, this is something that some researchers have pointed out, how did governments deal with the debt after World War II? And it was in part through what is now called financial repression, which sounds terrible. There was some inflation, there were some controls on banks, and saying, financial repression. The generation that followed World War II was the most prosperous in the history of this nation. If that's what financial repression looks like, let's have more of it. Let's have a doubling of middle-class living standards over the course of a generation.
Are you saying that inflation is crucial to that?
It would help significantly. And we're talking, again, Reagan's second-term levels of inflation. We're not talking, I want a principle that the first person to bring up Zimbabwe in an argument is considered to have lost the argument, because that's not what we're talking about.
Let's understand where we were at the end of World War II. We were 50% of global GDP. The dollar was as good as gold. And demographics were working in our favor. We had 16 people working for every person retiring under Social Security. That's a very different situation today. Inflation will not solve our problem. Yes, you can afford somewhat more, if you will, but understand our financial problem. Our financial problem is over $37 trillion in unfunded Medicare promises, $11 trillion in Social Security promises. The new trustees report came out this week. They went up $4.8 trillion in 1 year. You add that on top of our deficit for this year, $1.3 trillion. We are digging our hole deeper. Get this, 10 million a minute.